Okay, so today, you and I are doing something pretty cool. We're stepping way back in time, exploring a world filled with ancient forests, deep secrets, where nature itself was just part of everyday life.
Hmm.
You ever stop and think, what makes some of these old belief systems stick around, resonate even now?
That really is the core question, isn't it? And it sets us up perfectly for this deep dive into Celtic mythology. It's such a rich, complex tapestry.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to unpack it, maybe find some surprising bits, and get some key insights into, well, one of Western Europe's oldest belief systems.
And the way we're doing this is kind of fascinating in itself. We're drawing on all sorts of clues, archaeological finds, like those amazing cauldrons.
Right, the Gundestrup cauldron, for instance.
Exactly. And then there are writings from Roman historians, their perspective, and maybe most critically, the stuff that Christian monks wrote down centuries later.
Yeah, preserving those oral traditions, it really is like assembling a puzzle from different fields, archaeology, history, religious studies.
Yeah,
It takes a bit of everything.
definitely. So where do we even start to get a handle on this? The context, I guess.
Absolutely. Let's set the stage. We need to place Celtic culture geographically and historically. It starts emerging roughly around 800 BC, so late Bronze Age, stepping into the early Iron Age.
And it wasn't just in one small spot, right? It was spread out.
Hugely spread out. We're talking a massive swath of Western Europe. Think Ireland, the British Isles, northwest France, what the Romans called Gallia, even parts of Western Germany, northern Spain.
Wow. Okay, so a huge area. But were they all the same?
Well, that's the interesting part. There were strong common threads, language similarities, art styles you can recognize, social structures, religious ideas. But, and this is important, there was loads of regional diversity too. Different tribes, different local customs. It wasn't, monolithic.
Okay, got it. Not one single Celtic people in that sense.
Exactly. And one of the biggest things that makes studying their mythology unique and frankly quite challenging for us is that it was mainly an oral tradition for a very long time.
Right. They didn't write their sacred stuff down, did they?
For centuries, no. Which means every little scrap of evidence we do have is like gold dust. It's a precious little nugget.
That oral tradition thing is fascinating, though. Why do that? Why deliberately not write down the most important knowledge?
It suggests something profound, doesn't it? Maybe a deep trust in memory, in the spoken word. Perhaps the act of transmitting knowledge orally, person to person, was seen as sacred in itself, like the telling imbued it with power.
Huh. Never thought of it quite like that. So, okay, if they weren't writing, how did these stories and beliefs survive?
Well, through a few channels. We mentioned archaeology. The Gundestrup cauldron is a prime example, showing gods' rituals visually.
Okay.
Then we have accounts from outsiders, mostly Roman writers. They observed Celtic life, sometimes wrote about customs or beliefs, so often with their own biases, of course.
Naturally, Roman spin.
Yeah. But then, crucially, much later, Christian monks, especially in Ireland and Wales during the Middle Ages, started writing down these oral traditions. Ah, okay. So that's where a lot of the actual texts come from.
Exactly. Things like the Tuatha De Danann cycles about their gods, or the Ulster cycle, with heroes like Cuchulainn, and texts like the Leber Gabála Éireann, which is this kind of mythic history of Ireland.
So it's like layers of transmission, oral for centuries, then filtered through Roman observers, and then finally written down by monks with their own worldview.
Precisely. It highlights why we need that interdisciplinary approach you mentioned. You have to look at it from all angles.
Okay. So right at the heart of this society, kind of holding it all together, were the Druids, right? They seem almost legendary.
They really were central, architects of society and spirit, as you said. And their role was incredibly broad, not just religious leaders in a narrow sense.
Yeah, I was struck by that. They were judges, teachers, healers, philosophers. I mean, that's a huge portfolio, respected for wisdom, mystical power, involved in daily life, war, politics, everything.
It's an astonishing range, and it points to why their education had to be so rigorous.
Right. How did you even train for that? What did it involve? It was famously intense. Pliny the Elder, the Roman historian, he actually wrote that Druidic training could take up to 20 years.
20 years? Wow.
How-
That's commitment.
Isn't it? And remember, it was primarily oral. They weren't just memorizing facts from books. The oral transmission itself was part of the sacred process, keeping the knowledge alive, pure, by not writing it down.
So what were they learning for 2 decades?
A whole range of things. Natural sciences, astronomy tracking stars and sultans was vital poetry, history, law, and of course, the complex rituals and theology.
It sounds less like school and more like a whole way of life.
It absolutely was, and a core part of that life was acting as intermediaries, connecting the human world with the gods and the spirits of nature.
Okay, so where do they do this? Where did these rituals happen?
In places they considered sacred, deeply tied to nature, ancient oak groves were particularly important.
Hmm.
Also, riverbanks, certain caves, high hills, maybe even stone circles, these were their temples in a way.
Oak groves.
Right.
Why oak specifically?
Oaks were revered for their strength, their longevity, they symbolized durability, sanctity, and there seems to have been a connection with lightning. Oaks are often struck by lightning, which might have been seen as a sign of divine power.
Interesting. And the rituals themselves, what were they for?
Many things. Prayers for fertility, for harvest, masters of divination, reading omens, and using astrology to understand fate, and, crucially, to determine the right time for major festivals.
Ah, yes, the big festivals. Like Samhain.
Exactly. Samhain, around October 31st, marking summer's end, a very liminal time. Then, in bulk, in early February, Beltane around May 1st, and Lughnasadh in August. These punctuated the year, aligning life with nature's rhythm.
Tied to the sun, the harvest, and the thinning of the veil at Samhain.
Precisely. And symbols were key. We mentioned the oak. Animals, too, were hugely significant. The ox, the snake, deer, various birds. They weren't just creatures. They often represented nature spirits or were linked to specific deities and rituals.
Which brings us neatly to the deities themselves, the Celtic gods. How should we think about them? Are they like the Greek gods? Very human-like?
Less so, generally. They're often more tied to embodying natural forces, universal principles, and their names and specific characteristics could vary quite a bit between different tribes and regions. It's less of a neat, organized pantheon like Olympus.
More fluid, maybe?
Definitely more fluid. But there are some major figures who crop up frequently. Cernunnos, for example, is one of the most iconic.
The horned god, right. You see images of him quite often.
Yes, Cernunnos literally means horned one. He's usually shown as a man with stag antlers, sometimes sitting cross-legged, often surrounded by animals. He really embodies the wildness of nature, the forest, mastery over animals.
And the horns.
They're powerful symbols, signifying nature's cycles, fertility, power, the constant rhythm of growth, death, and rebirth. He represents that whole life cycle. The Gundestrup cauldron, again, gives us one of our best images of him.
Okay, Cernunnos. Who else is central? Dagda sounds important. God of power and wisdom.
The Dagda, yes. A major father figure in Irish mythology particularly, often depicted as, well, quite imposing, maybe a bit rough-looking, but powerful. He usually carries a huge club and has a magic cauldron.
A magic cauldron. What did that do?
It was said to produce an endless supply of food, and sometimes described as having a life-restoring elixir. It's a potent symbol of abundance, life's continuity, hospitality.
So he represents fertility, wisdom, magic, even war. And the club.
Ah, the club was magical too. One end could kill 9 men with a single blow, but the other end could bring the dead back to life. Talk about power over life and death. He was also a master of music, supposedly had a magic harp, a really multifaceted, powerful figure.
Wow, okay. Then there's Lugh, the multi-skilled god.
Yeah.
Sounds like a bit of a polymath.
That's a good way to put it. Lu Limfada Lu of the long arm, or sometimes Simuldannic, meaning equally skilled in all arts. He's a god of craftsmen, warriors, kingship, magic. You name it, he could probably do it.
A jack of all trades, but master of all.
Pretty much. He's associated with skill, artistry, oaths, and truth. And, importantly, he gives his name to that harvest festival, Lughnasadh. He's often linked to the sun, light, life energy, a protector of the growing, fertile aspects of nature.
Okay, so Cernunnos for the wild, Dagda for power and abundance, Lugh for skill and light. What about a major goddess?
Brigid is hugely important, especially revered in Ireland. She's a goddess of fertility, poetry, inspiration, arts and crafts, and healing.
Inspiration and healing, that's an interesting combination.
It is. She represents life's renewal, creativity, the spark of invention. Her influence was so profound, she transitioned into Christian belief as Saint Bridget of Kildare.
Right, I've heard of Saint Bridget, so that's the same figure,
The
essentially.
connection is incredibly strong, yes. In her pagan form, she's associated with a sacred fire, kept perpetually burning by priestesses, symbolizing life, purity, the hearth. She's also linked to smithcraft, marriage, and family, a really powerful, nurturing, creative force.
So listening to this, it really feels like nature isn't just part of their belief system. It is the belief system almost.
That's a perfect way to put it. Nature worship was the pulsating heart of Celtic belief. It wasn't just respected. It was seen as inherently alive, sacred, blessed.
Every tree, river, mountain had a spirit.
Yes, exactly. They possessed their own spiritual essence, their own being. This wasn't just some abstract idea. It shaped how they interacted with the world daily. Nature was an active participant in their lives and their faith.
So those sacred landscapes we talked about, the oak forests, rivers, caves, hills, stone circles, they weren't just locations, they were alive.
They were focal points of spiritual power, places where the connection to the divine, to the spirits of nature was strongest. And yes, the oaks, again, standing out for that durability, longevity, that connection to divine energy, maybe through lightning.
And this all ties back into the seasonal cycles, right? The rituals mirrored nature.
Completely. The rituals celebrated those cycles, reinforcing the idea of life's continuity. Samhain is such a key example. October 31st, the veil thins.
Right, between our world and the other world.
Exactly. Spirits of the dead could return, communication was possible. So rituals would honor the ancestors, commemorate the dead, but also look forward, laying the groundwork for new life in the spring. It's that constant cycle of death leading to rebirth.
It's very holistic.
It is. And even animals fit into this view. They weren't just part of the scenery. They were often seen as messengers from the gods or protectors or embodying certain powers.
Like the deer for Cernunnos.
Precisely. The deer symbolizing renewal, movement, the wildness he represents. Or snakes, often seen as symbols of rebirth and transformation because they shed their skin. Each creature could have its own specific meaning and connection.
So pulling all these threads together,
Right.
what's the big takeaway from exploring Celtic mythology? What does it tell us?
Well, I think it really expresses a whole philosophy of living with nature, not just in it. A profound sense of connection. It emphasizes these deep cycles, life, death, rebirth, as fundamental truths. It shows us the wisdom held by figures like the Druids who guided society through that understanding. And it presents gods who are intrinsically linked to the natural world, embodying its forces. All these elements, nature, gods, rituals, leaders, were woven together, shaping how the Celts saw themselves and their world.
And it hasn't just vanished, has it? There's a legacy.
Absolutely. You see its echoes and direct influence in modern paganism and neo-Druidism. But even beyond specific groups, it taps into something broader, that ongoing human quest to find our place in the cosmos, to understand nature, to connect with something ancient. It's part of that search for cultural roots and meaning.
It feels very relevant, actually.
I think so too, which leads to a final thought, perhaps. Given this deep reverence for nature we've uncovered, this trust in oral tradition, in knowledge passed down through generations, what might these ancient Celtic beliefs teach us today? About our own relationship with the environment, and maybe about the kinds of knowledge, the ways of knowing that we tend to value or perhaps overlook in our own time.
Yeah, that's definitely something to chew on. Our connection to nature and what counts as valuable knowledge. Lots to think about there.